Hello and welcome to Savage Garden, an Interview with the Vampire podcast sampling immortality one morsel at a time. I'm Kat, and joining me on this journey is Naomi, and today we are here to delve into Season 1, Episode 5, A Vile Hunger for Your Hammering Heart. Now, before we do dive into this episode, we should say that this one comes with some trigger warnings, as due to the content of this episode, we will be discussing sexual assault and domestic violence. When we get to those moments, we will kind of flag it, and we'll also put the time codes in the show notes for anybody who would kind of like to skip over that points. So yes, Naomi, let's get into this. Vile Hunger for Your Hammering Heart. First impressions, first time you watched it.
So we should say it's written by Hannah Muscovich and directed by Levan Akin, who is a wonderful director. He has directed multiple episodes of Interview with a Vampire, and he also, I believe, has his own film, which I think is called Crossing. Might be wrong on that, but I think it's called Crossing. He's a fantastic director, and he also directed the series 2 finale. This is a rough episode to rewatch. It has some moments of levity in it, particularly at the beginning. There's some entertaining moments, but it sort of starts batshit and it continues on. We will talk about the drop in much stronger detail later on, as well as what happened to Claudia. I have strong feelings on both. But yes, it's an episode I don't tend to rewatch that much because it's quite a heavy episode. It has moments of lightness, but I mean, we start with Daniel sitting there reading out Claudia's diaries, in which she has detailed the last words of her victims, all of which are horrific, while Louis is basically sort of sat almost on Armand's lap, feeding from him. That's insane. I mean, in Anne Rice's world, her vampires didn't have sex because presumably of the time she was writing it, and it was all very allegorical. So the way that her vampires had sex was by drinking each other's blood. So this episode basically starts with Armand and Louis having sex in front of Daniel. I mean, what is it with the weird fetish roleplay with these guys?
Yeah, it's an interesting little dynamic that they've got, isn't it? They're like putting on a little show for Daniel as he's reading these really, really horrific things, and it's because also he's detailing the victims as well, and you find out that there was children, there was all sorts of people that she did not discriminate with who her victims were. Just the juxtaposition is it's an interesting one, and I think it's in this scene where, if you haven't already twigged, I feel that this is one of the scenes where you kind of begin to twig that something definitely isn't quite right with Rachid, because he oversteps a lot. And I just kind of feel, because he goes on about like how he's read the diaries and things, and I kind of feel if he was just a basic human worker, he wouldn't have access to these things.
Yeah, it is. You're right. It's like they're doing a little bit of a role play, a cute little performance for Daniel, because Armand is there and he's so dreamily amused by all of it. It's the first time we get a warning that the other vampires will be furious at Louis for doing the interview. Armand basically suggests that the book is Suicide by Vampire, which I think is really interesting. And then we have Louis, Rachid is an opinionated young man. Louis, you are completely insane. This is not Rachid. We know this. There is no Rachid. It is Armand. He is considerably older and more powerful than you. And you are playing with Daniel for your own, which is funny. I think this is the first scene where it's sort of almost actively quite unpleasant, because everything in this opening sequence is a performance. I mean, like when he's just testing Daniel all the way through, saying, what did he taste like? And Daniel's like, I didn't ask that. He's like, oh, honey and pineapple. He gorges himself for days. you're like, well, no, he doesn't, because presumably his Armand or food tastes like paste to him, which is what we find out. So this is all just a show that you are putting on for Daniel to amuse yourself. And it was a little moment I'd missed the first time around when Louis is talking about Rachid's routine. And he says, metronomic, my Rachid, which is both affectionate, but also then harkens back to that terrible fight that they have in series 2 when he calls Armand boring. It's this little hint of, this is all very routine. This is, I have this sort of depression cave in Dubai. I have this very privileged, very luxurious life, but he's bored and he's having to entertain himself by playing up to Daniel. I mean, there's no need for any of this. There's no need for him to feed from Armand in front of Daniel. It's just absolutely a weird bit of, like, I don't know, fetish role play that he's enjoying, and taking little gripes at his life with Armand and the nature of their relationship in front of Daniel, who at this point still doesn't understand the nature of this dynamic. It's interesting, and it's not particularly fair to either Armand or Daniel, really. But I'm always intrigued by Armand, because all the way through this, I've been like, what? And we'll talk about that in series 2, but what does he get out of the relationship with Louis? I mean, he loves him, obviously. And obviously, one only has to look at Jacob Anderson to be like, well, fair enough. But there are lots of little groping moments there, which shows that there is trouble in paradise.
It's a whole cosplaying as human thing, isn't it? That just doesn't quite make sense. Like you say, it's the whole thing of going through like his routine. He works out. He fasts. He does this. He does that. Is it? Well, none of this is true. Like it's not necessary for this interview. This interview is supposed to be about Louis' experience. Like, why are you bringing up all of this stuff? It definitely points to, perhaps Louis having other intentions behind bringing Daniel in, as we've sort of touched upon before.
Yes. And that's an interesting one. Do you think vampires need to work out? Presumably not. Presumably they are stuck at the moment they were when it would suck if you were like having a really bad day, if you had terrible skin and were feeling bloated and everything else, and then somebody changed you into a vampire, and then you had to look like that for the rest of your life. God, I'd be grumpy. I'd only want to be made a vampire like on my best day when I was looking stunning.
You also have to like be careful that you have the hairstyle that you want, because this episode does touch on, we get that sort of brief sort of throwaway line when they're reading through Claudia's diary of her hair keeps growing back, so you've got to make sure that you've got your right hairstyle, you're at your perfect weight. Just I guess everyone thinks becoming a vampire would be great, but when you think that you will literally become frozen in time, that you got to make sure that that's the right time.
Yeah, definitely. And once we've done with our little creepy, weird role play sequence at the beginning, we flash back to New Orleans and Louis in worried daddy mode. And he's just like letting off, I mean, poor birds, because he's breaking their wings in order to entice Claudia out of the coffin. And I always think it's a really interesting dynamic in that I think Louis adores Claudia completely unconditionally. He loves her. But I don't think he sees her, whereas I think Lestat sees her. So Lestat knows instantly that she's not in the coffin, that she's never been in the coffin, that she's been out eating without them. But I think it's the difference between, being loved and being seen, because I do think that Louis' version of Claudia in his head is very idealistic. He loves who she is and also what she meant to him in terms of him of what she represents for him in terms of, you know, we discuss it later, she was made out of selfishness. He did make her to kind of save her, to be kind of a salve on his soul in many ways. There's no question he absolutely adores her. And I do think that Lestat loves her too, but he's a very different parent, and he understands and sees Claudia for precisely who she is. And then we get the sequence of them reading her diaries, which is an absolutely horrific invasion of her privacy, obviously. Lestat, I mean, it's very funny, Lestat being instantly weirded out by what she says in her diary about if she has sex, will she go back to being a virgin immediately? And I mean, like, this diva having histrionics over someone else out divaing him is very good. As we find 2 seconds later, when instead of just being in Claudia's room, when they come in, he's literally hides in her coffin so that he can leap out and surprise her. The man never does anything subtly. He has to be the one to like leap out. And it's the first time in this sequence when she's come home. And obviously, Louis like, we were all really worried about you. And she's been out there scoffing away on people. It's the first time we see Lestat grabbing Claudia by the throat. And Claudia is just failed by every single man that she meets. We're not really qualified to talk about misogynoir, but every man she meets puts his hands on her.
Yeah, it's true. And yeah, and because it's that Louis doesn't do anything. Louis just watches it, and it's unfortunately a scenario that a lot of people do have to live with at certain points in their life. And it is that early sign. I say early sign, there's already been signs, but it's, I guess, a more the biggest red flag that this family unit just can't work anymore.
Yes, because Lestat is becoming resentful, and Louis is different. Louis's relationship with Lestat has stagnated and continues to stagnate, as we'll talk about shortly. But already at this point, they're not particularly well equipped to be parents. I mean, Lestat comes from a family of horrific abuse. His father beat him, his brothers beat him, his mother. Well, we shall see Gabrielle in series 3, but I mean, she pretty much abandons him the first chance she gets. One of the funniest things in the book is how much Armand loathes Gabrielle. So I'm really looking forward to seeing those sequences. But he has no understanding of how to be a parent. And I do think the first series is devoid of sequences that we've discussed before that show how much he loves Claudia, because he does. I don't think there's any doubt in that whatsoever. But I think there needs to be, in series 3, more of those fill the gap moments so that we can see them. But he hasn't got a clue how to deal with his terror about her being out there, you know, killing all these people, getting herself in trouble, potentially threatening Louis, because of course it all comes down to Louis, because her actions put both of them in extreme danger. And his first and immediate reaction to that is to get physical. And you're right, Louis just stands there. I mean, she's put them both at tremendous risk. But when it comes to it, Louis just stands there.
I was in the sequence as well, just in terms of vampire lore, you see Claudia's reflection. So these are, yeah, when she's sort of like sitting on the floor scream, because she screams and she breaks the mirror, you see her reflection in it. So just you know, for vampire lore, you know, fanatics, these are vampires that can be seen, which I guess kind of explains to a degree how they have been able to survive for as long as they have in New Orleans, because it would be pretty fucking weird if those two men were never seen in any reflection. Like, wait a minute, you don't have a reflection. That's odd. So I guess it kind of glosses over.
Lestat is definitely a man that spends an awful lot of time looking in the mirror, checking out those fits, as does Louis, to be frank. I mean, those outfits are all beautifully tailored. These are men that know, that wear clothes as part of their social standing and know how good they look. We have that odd little sequence with Tom Anderson, who they both very clearly loathe. I've never really quite understood the purpose of that sequence. I wasn't sure if he's trying in that scene. He obviously wants their votes, but I wasn't sure if he's trying to warn them about the potential police raid on their house, or if he's trying to keep them there while the police raid their house.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think he's had them at the table. They've made it quite clear they're not interested in him, and it's like, well, okay, well, police ran at your house. Lol,
Yeah.
it's tricked you. Didn't want your vote anyway. I'm just a little distraction. I think it's a little bit of both, because they do have money, so they would be people who would be a worthwhile investment.
Yes, because
for
it's
him.
an interesting, because we've spoken about, they have money, but they probably don't have the degree of social standing. They're kind of not even accepted, just kind of, I think the good social folk of New Orleans, who of course would all be horrific racists and homophobes, allow them to be as part of their circle whilst not gaining them the same degree of social standing, because obviously at this point there is not a single person that doesn't think that they're together. I mean, the business partner routine does not work. And obviously Louis being black as well. I mean, the degree, they'd have had no respect whatsoever for Lestat for being both gay and being with a black man. So it is the little clips of them in their sort of social settings in New Orleans are always interesting to kind of see how there's so much mutual loathing between everybody, because they so clearly hate Tom Anderson, and he's just trying to lord it over them with every opportunity that he has. I mean, they freeze time and he cuts Tom's cheek. I mean, you must know that Tom will think they did it. Do they just accept these little things? Yeah, it's a scene I've never quite, it's just like a little throwaway, but I've never really quite understood the sort of the need for that particular sequence. But I suppose it segues beautifully into the next scene, which is Claudia just reveling in chaos, drunk as a skunk, while the police search Louis and Lestat's house. And I mean, she has put them in horrific danger. They are at far more risk of being imprisoned for having one bed in the house than they are for being potential serial killers. And she's great in this scene. Bailey Bass is fantastic in this scene, I think, because she's just gone full feral. She just doesn't care anymore. The sequence where you go in and you see all the little trophies, amazing. Just completely feral.
Yeah, she's definitely a little serial killer with collecting her trophies. I mean, I do enjoy her. Obviously, she's not been using the incinerator, which is why Louis thinks that she's been on a hunger strike. She has instead been dumping them like in the bayou, a couple of towns over, whatever. And obviously, the first storm or the bodies wash up. I'm pretty sure that's what happened in Dexter, like because Dexter was putting his bodies like in some water, and then it's like Claudia love, like.
Yep, there was like 200 bodies for because she's been a hungry girl. And I mean, all the trophies that she's kept in the house. I wish they'd done the sequence of that they did in the film of her hiding everybody underneath the pretty dolls. Whereas this, it's just, she's got fingers and toes and a woman's breast in her chest of drawers. And it's the guy that's still alive, but only just in the cupboard, that is truly horrific. And then, of course, this sparks a huge, huge fight between everybody. Because again, we come down to everybody's different types of parenting. Louis is just terrified. Lestat is also terrified. I think he is terrified for the risk that she is bringing to Louis because he entirely focuses on Louis. I think he's terrified at the risk to her, but completely incapable of discussing that in any sensible, meaningful way. So he just lashes out. I mean, when he says, remember how happy we were before her, dude, he was about to leave you.
It's true.
You were not happy before Claudia. What happened precisely before Claudia is that Louis said to you that you were only ever going to be alone, and then went out into the night and found you both a daughter. Before that point, your relationship was over and Louis was being vile. You were done. You were completely done. But Lestat in this scene is very much the sort of, I don't know, unhappy, hateful mother in a way, saying all these terrible things about his little baby girl. Because no, they weren't happy before her. They really weren't. And that's just nonsense. But it's one of these things like, oh, sometimes when people get into fights, it's like, oh, we made great sacrifices. We did all this for you. We did all this for you. You're super ungrateful. He does say something about when he reads about reading her diaries in the earlier scene where he says that it was inked with ungratefulness. Well, you shouldn't have been reading her diaries. She doesn't have to be grateful that you dragged her from a fire and made her into this. Why should she be grateful for that? She didn't get a choice. You did it because Louis begged and because you like the notion of a child. But poor Claudia was nowhere in any of this discussion.
And I think that is the interesting dynamic, because we know that Lestat was very careful to get Louis' consent. He courted him for several months before he even made an advance on him romantically. And then again, it was some time before we got the scene in the church where Louis was turned, but Louis was given that choice. Claudia wasn't. She was, dying of a blaze, and it's not like Louis had any connection to her other than she was this random girl that he found, and he needed to save her to save himself. So it is interesting that they are, banding around words like ungrateful and things, because it's not something that she wanted or was aware of
Yeah,
in
why
any way,
should
shape,
she
or
be
form.
grateful? Why should she be grateful that she has been dragged into a household of two vampires who are using her as a crutch? I mean, Lestat clings to her initially because she is something that brings Louis out of his shell and brings Louis to life again. But then as soon as she becomes a problem, which she was always going to become a problem because you cannot change a teenage girl, as we had the discussion earlier. Imagine changing a child with that level, with all those hormones. They're never going to be able to do things in a sensible manner. And it's a question about whether Claudia does manage to overcome that. I mean, even in Paris, when she is years older, she makes some foolish decisions out of love, out of a need of kinship and family that aren't as considered as they perhaps should have been for a woman of her age. But that's because she's always got these sort of, her hormones are always at war, her emotions are always at war with her fierce intelligence, because she's incredibly clever. But yeah, why should Claudia be grateful for suddenly being dragged into a world where she is now a permanent child to a random white man and some black guy that picked her out of the flames? I mean, as she said, she didn't know that Louis didn't know that she was dying. Could have taken to a hospital. She would have been burnt, but she would have had a different life. But he took all of that away, and she was made out of extreme selfishness on their part. And I don't doubt that they both loved her dearly, but Claudia was never given any option in any of this.
I do like a little secret bedroom, the little secret
Yes.
entrance to the bedroom. That was like, that's some architecture going on in that house. We've talked about the suicide skylight, but then we've also got like a
Yeah.
secret a secret door to get into rooms. Like, great little house.
There's a lot of, and I also sort of, when it comes to things like this, I'm always intrigued. Like, have you decided to do all this yourself, Lestat? Because you don't strike me as particularly handy. So what we doing? Presumably we are getting decorators to do this and then eating them afterwards so that they don't know. I guess that's so unfair. These poor decorators taking all that time, all that energy, and then you're eating them and presumably without paying them so that they don't know about your little secret rooms. That's terrible. We do get in the middle of this fairly unpleasant scene, to be honest, one of the most iconic lines in the show, which is Claudia asking, who's my Lestat? Who's my Louis? Which one of you is going to fuck me? And Lestat, being Lestat in that moment, saying, I prefer a fuller figure, which is not correct, Lestat. If you look at Antoinette and if you look at Louis, you do not prefer a fuller figure. But it's so typical for Lestat to respond so glibly and just be like, oh, she's being impossible. To such a moment. And he does seem really, really worried when he realizes that Claudia's been out there constantly trying to make herself a companion. But, you know, he escalates everything, and he should never have called her a mistake, which is a terrible, terrible thing to call her. And because we said, it was none of this was on her. None of this was her doing. Why is she a mistake? Just because these two men decided to be selfish and to bring this child into their lives. And she casually reveals that he is still cheating with Antoinette. Lestat. He is such an idiot. Because I don't believe in the context of the show that he ever loved or wanted Antoinette. He just wants Louis. But I think he is so terrified, particularly as Louis never says that he loves him. I don't think he ever believes that Louis ever loved him. And so I think Antoinette's the backup. Antoinette is the way for him to feel safe. But he's constantly endangering his relationship with Louis by having her around.
Yeah, I mean, everybody likes to feel loved and wanted, and Antoinette, I guess, provides that for Lestat. Louis been solely focused on Claudia. You know, she's not eating. He's concerned for her, and that's just causing a bigger rift with their relationship. And Lestat is somebody who he needs that validation from another, which is, you know, it's the whole thing with Louis saying, you know, he says to Louis, "Don't ever leave me. I don't like being on my own." And I guess he, in this little threesome, he feels alone, and then he's got somebody waiting in the wings who can provide him with that companionship and support. And yeah, I think she is his backup for. I don't see her necessarily as a side piece. I see her more as a backup for when Louis leaves him. At least he won't be alone like Louis said he would be.
I mean, I would love to talk to the actress who plays Antoinette and kind of see what her view on it is, because Antoinette is with him for years. And he does eventually keep his promises. He turns her, but he only turns her as part of this ridiculous plot, at which point I think he's just completely lost it, because he knows damn well that Louis is never going to allow Claudia to be killed. So poor Antoinette just spends all of her time waiting to be the only one. She's practically his wife for the 3 years after the drop, because he is exclusively with her then. And then he drops her, leaves her the second Louis comes back. But yes, he is an absolute idiot. Jacob Anderson in this scene is so good, because there's this sort of sadness and absolute resignation when Claudia says that, because it's clearly not a surprise to him that Lestat is still cheating. But what Lestat always wants is this grand passion from Louis. He wants this grand reaction or a fight, because in his head that shows that Louis loves him. And so, of course, when Louis doesn't respond with anything other than kind of sadness and resignation, I think in Lestat's head, that just further cements the fact that Louis doesn't care about him enough to do anything about Antoinette. And Claudia is kind of magnificently manipulative in that scene when she's putting on the little girl voice and saying he's tired of us, the housewife and the mistake. And Louis was not and never has been a housewife. That's a term that gets bandied about sometimes in Spanish circles, but no. I mean, the man is a capitalist king. He is out there running his whorehouses, doing his business dealings. I mean, Lestat is just his unemployed business partner there to look respectable purely because he's white. Louis can make these deals because Lestat is white. Lestat is not bringing anything of value to Louis's business dealings other than the color of his skin. And I don't think, that's not an insult to Lestat. I don't think we're meant to believe that Lestat is running anything. He is just there for Louis. He's very happy, playing the piano, being seen, being, I'm sure, a gracious host in the Azalea, but he's not an equal partner in that business in terms of the actual work.
No, not at all.
We flash back to Daniel then, who is, what I love about Daniel is that he's having absolutely none of it. He doesn't care about Louis trying to humanize poor little baby angel Claudia. He's like, nope, just a killer out there munching on everyone. Like, why do you want me to humanize her? And we get one of my favorite lines from Daniel where he says that she makes them look like a pair of whiny existential queens. Because yes, she does. She most definitely does. And then Claudia departs, and which is pure because, again, she is her father's daughter, because that's precisely what Lestat would do. Lestat would run out after a little argument like this instead of having a kind of a cooling off period and having a sensible discussion. She just runs, and she is not gone for 7 days. She is gone for 7 years. And Louis just completely falls apart. He becomes clinically depressed. He basically doesn't get out of the house. Lestat, presumably out of sheer pettiness, allows the house to absolutely go to shit during that time. And I'm kind of curious what kind of, we can see how upset and how not in his right mind Louis must have been at the time for him to think that the two of them shutting themselves in that house for 7 years as hermits, with people calling them the weird brothers, was less conspicuous and less of an issue than them continuing to live life as they were previously with all the parties and everything else. People will always talk about the weird, crazy guys in the house. If they just carried on precisely as they were before, would they have attracted so much attention as they do? I don't think so. That was Lestat's little brainwave, and Lestat, we love him, but he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. So the fact that Louis just is mentally in a state of complete collapse without his beloved Claudia, clearly not thinking correct. I do love whoever was on the production team that was like, you know what? We should get a raccoon. We should have a little raccoon wandering around. That would be good. But yeah, it all goes to shit. You've got Louis basically being a hermit. He's obviously not eating properly because he's eating rats, which is presumably affecting his mental state as well. And you've got Lestat constantly cheating on him with Antoinette during this period because, again, he's getting nothing at home because Louis is being purposefully vicious to Lestat during this period, which he accepts. He acknowledges that during the series 2 finale, that he was making it, that he hated his life, so he wanted Lestat to be miserable. So he is purposefully cold and cruel and withholding to him during this period. And I feel like if these were our friends, we would just be screaming at them on a daily basis, for fuck's sake, split up. Just leave.
Yes.
Just leave. For the love of God, just leave. Louis, my sweet, beautiful angel, we need to get you. I mean, I'm sure that in like 1930s, was it Roaring 20s or Roaring 30s, whatever, I doubt that they had the psychiatric treatment that Louis required. But the man needs help. He needs institutionalization. He needs to be looked after for his clinical depression. There's a lot of discussion about whether Louis is actually schizophrenic and has inherited it from his brother. But, you know, the man is ill. The man needs love and cookies and good people around him. And it must equally have been awful for Lestat to have seen Louis in that terrible, terrible way for 7 years, not really be able to do anything about it, and have Louis just be horrific to him that whole time, just being cruel. There is, you know, he says, or at least at least he's paying attention to me. I thought, set yourself on fire, see if he notices, which is, of course, a reference to Nikki, which is awful. When Louis finds that out, he's going to feel really bad. He's going to feel very bad about himself. But yeah, I can't imagine if we were like Lestat, we'd be like, for God's sake, either stop cheating with Antoinette, get Louis some help, and go back to being a proper, decent partner, or leave him and go be with Antoinette. Go be happy. Why stay in a relationship where someone is just being appalling to you on a daily basis? And I think that it's the real tragedy for both of them is that they didn't separate. But I suppose, I don't know, vampires probably aren't really made to separate, are they? They're made to go insane and die. But I guess if you've got this blood bond, unless you have, you know, very, very strong sort of mental reserves, it must be very hard to be like, you know what, I'm just going to leave you. I'm going to go away, live my life as a happy vampire somewhere else. We're divorced now, babes. Sorry.
But equally, vampires are immortal. So what difference does, you know what, I'm going to give you like a couple of decades to, you know, you do you, I'll do me. Let's, you know, let's grieve the loss of our daughter in our own ways. Let's, you know, let's meet up again in the 50s and see how we're feeling, you know, because to a vampire, you know, a decade is like a week for the rest of us almost. I feel like they don't need to be trapped in together for seven. I mean, we all, you know, we all lived through COVID and lockdown, and that put a strain on even the most shiny unicorn magical of relationships, because you were suddenly trapped with in, you know, people were trapped in with their loved one and they couldn't get out. You know, you could go for your mandatory walk, but you couldn't escape. And just the tiniest little thing, but, you know, like not doing the dishes properly, or, you know, putting such a thing escalates into, you know, great expansive arguments. Who's the better Spider-Man? You know, they all cause these things, and that's without the whole situation that these guys are going through. So when you then
Yeah.
put a bad relationship into this thing, you know, we heard all of the statistics of, you know, abuse spiking and stuff during the pandemic, and this is seen here through, you know, the past in New Orleans, through these two characters of, you know, even what was the grandest love at the beginning can just descend into pure malice and toxicity.
I think they're just sick of each other at this point, because all Lestat wants is for Louis to say that he loves him. That's all he wants. All he wants is the slightest recognition from Louis that he loves him. And that is something that, I mean, I feel that throughout the series, Louis shows time and time and time and time again how much he loves Lestat, but he just, for whatever reason, can't say the words. And it's because they're the last words that he says to Paul. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we see him say "I love you" to Claudia either. So these aren't words. They're not words that you throw around. Oh, that was a weirdly phrase. Throw around for Louis. They have great meaning to him, and so he doesn't get that. he acts out. So as you said, he's constantly looking for that reassurance that he is special, that he is worthwhile, that he is loved and appreciated from Antoinette. As he says, if my considerables keep being ignored. And in return, Louis blames Lestat for Claudia leaving, which is true, but also significantly underplays his role in bringing Claudia into this relationship. And so he just takes out his misery on Lestat on a daily basis and is abusive and cold and just gripes and picks and picks and picks and picks at every little thing. And yeah, they are unfortunately at this point in their lives a completely toxic duo, and they should have walked away from each other. That's the thing I would wish for them. I would wish for Louis to have had the mental reserves to kind of be like, you know what, we just need to move away. But he won't, because he's so convinced that Claudia is going to walk back in the door, and Lestat won't leave Louis. So you have Louis refusing to go anywhere for Claudia and Lestat refusing to go anywhere for Louis. And it's just a horrific, horrible, miserable mess. And this is where we have to start with the trigger warnings. One of the things that we never really touch on that much in the series is the realization that it is Louis and his constant wandering into the night and calling for Claudia that means that Bruce finds her. So we will now have to start with the trigger warnings, which is the discussion of Claudia and Bruce. Now, Kat and I watch a lot of horror and a lot of horror movies. One of the most constant tropes, which I loathe with a fiery passion, is women getting raped as a plot device. I hate it. I hate it so much. And I'm kind of slightly reserving judgment to see what they do in series 3, but I don't feel it was necessary to age up Claudia, to have the first vampire she meets outside of Louis and Lestat rape her.
She says before she leaves, doesn't she, sort of like, what life am I gonna have? Who's gonna want me? Perverts, little boys. And so she realizes that she is either gonna be fodder for perverts, or she herself would have to be the pervert, because it would only be young boys. And while she has the body of a teenage girl, her mind is so much more mature. And then she's going around college, she's learning, she's trying to track down vampires. And then, the first vampire that she sees, he's not interested. He doesn't seem to be interested in Claudia because she is another vampire. He seems very drawn to Claudia because she looks like a much younger girl. And it just makes the whole sequence more uncomfortable than ick on an extra level. Like, we really don't need this then bringing to the table.
I mean, it's, she leaves and literally the first vampire she meets is a super creepy incel who has been following her for 6 colleges, we find out, because he's heard Louis speaking her name in the wind and is intrigued, and so has gone out there to find her. And obviously I can see within the context of the show that they have done this to mirror what happened to Lestat, but that will only work if they actually have that play out, which is that Lestat's turning by Magnus is described in the books as rape. Obviously, we haven't seen that yet, so we don't know how they are going to portray it. But it is obviously intended to reinforce even more sort of, I guess, the cycles of abuse, and Claudia being Lestat's daughter and having this sort of terrible mirror thing that they have in common. But it's, I don't know. In the movie, I like the Taken movies, even though they're truly terrible. But there is this very reactive sort of right-wing thing of, if you leave home, trouble will find you. If you leave home, particularly, or if you leave America in Taken's case, you will find yourself in immediate danger. And Lestat warns Claudia that vampires are vicious. He warns them that they're scary. And the very first thing she does is ignore him and leaves. And then this happens to her, thereby proving Lestat right. And that's a little narrative thing I don't particularly love. That actually, and again with Paris, Lestat is completely right the whole time. That going out there without him, they are both in terrible danger and terrible, terrible things happen to them. But that is partly because he doesn't warn them appropriately of these dangers. But I didn't love in this episode that Claudia's first attempt at freedom and first meeting with one of her own kind immediately results in her being raped. It just feels a bit, little girl, stay at home or this will happen to you.
I mean, kudos to the actor who plays Bruce, because it's only a couple of short scenes that he's in, but I'd still loathe him to this day. So he made a really good, well, not good, but he made a really strong impression in those couple of scenes, because thankfully we don't see the abuse. We see the start of it with him breaking her legs. And we know that although vampires, they heal, but they heal slowly. So we can imagine how long she was incapacitated for. We don't see it. There's enough malevolence about him in the scenes that we do see him in that just the brain fills in something far worse. And then the fact that Louis has removed those pages from the diary,
Yeah.
kind of again, it kind of takes that experience from Claudia. It's Louis framing her narrative,
Yep.
thinking she will look better because this has been omitted. But as awful an ordeal as it is her ordeal. It's her story. It's something that she has documented in her journals. And who is Louis to censor her voice and her experiences?
The missing pages have become kind of a little thing in fandom as to what they mean. But I agree that it is, I think in this case, it probably just is what it appears to be, which is, as you said, Louis' misguided attempts to protect her by removing her words. I mean, you're giving Daniel all the rest of her story. You have no qualms in handing over her private diaries, particularly when she starts to talk about Madeline in later episodes. You've got no qualms about betraying her privacy to Daniel, even though obviously she is decades dead at this point. But you remove this aspect because it is an aspect that you don't want to consider, you don't want to think about. And that's understandable. But yes, they were her words. What was he to remove them? And then we have this very, very ugly scene in which Daniel quite correctly points out that, if he's self-editing, which we find out Louis has been doing quite a lot of self-editing, it makes it very difficult to follow, to be able to trust what he's saying. And Louis responds viciously and unpleasantly by exacerbating the symptoms of Daniel's Parkinson's. And it's a really ugly, unpleasant little sequence. I think we have to give Asad Zaman massive credit here for completely diffusing it with a line which is delivered so brilliantly when he says, Mr. Dulac occasionally finds it difficult to talk about Claudia. Just such brilliant comic timing and an exceptional man of understatement. And it was quite brave of Daniel in that circumstances to get up and slap Louis. But it is a really ugly moment. And I think the whole episode is just about how abuse just a bit begets abuse the whole way through. You have Lestat playing out his abuse with his parents with Claudia. You have Louis turning his misery and sadness and taking it out on Lestat. You've got Louis turning out his frustrations and his anger and his rage on Daniel. And the only one actually that manages to skip through all of this unfazed is the architect of a lot of it later on, who is Armand. He just floats merrily around in the backgrounds, giving out warnings and stopping things escalating between Louis and Daniel. But it's a really, really, really unpleasant sequence. And then we have the scene of Grace just absolutely kicking Louis when he's down. Again, Grace, I like Grace. I really do. I feel like Grace was, she seems so wonderful and so clever. And in that time, particularly as a Black woman, she probably had very limited realistic opportunities, even as a privileged, because Louis's family, whilst being Black, are still privileged within that society by virtue of the money that they have. But I mean, it was all about marrying Grace off, having Grace have kids. And, she hasn't got her father, she hasn't got her brother, she loses her mother, and she is left with a brother who pays for the house, I guess. And because he gives her the house, doesn't he? He gives her the house in the last episode when they hard launch Claudia at the mother's wake, which is, that's just, again, insane choice to suddenly be like, oh, hey, here's our kid at a wake. But I think Grace has just had enough, She hasn't got any money. She says they've lost all the money in the Depression. She's having to move to get work. And so she decides that she needs to mentally bury Louis. And so she puts him on the gravestone. It's just so unnecessary. It's just so unnecessary. And just an absolute kicking him when he's down. Because she can sever ties without doing that. And it does raise really interesting questions about whether Louis is actually now legally dead at that point. Presumably not. He's got multiple... I guess his money allows him to buy lawyers who solve these things for him. But yeah, it's really a sequence of Louis at his lowest point, dragging himself out of his depression bed to go and see Grace. And this is the result. And then we get to the fight. And before we get into the sort of the discussion of it and what plays, we should probably discuss it more widely. This is a huge flashpoint for the fans and the big book purists alike. It's probably the one thing that they agree on, and people really do loathe what happens in this episode. And I do wonder if the writers, if Roland Jones had their time again, would they do Lestat dropping Louis? Because, I don't know, it's caused such conflict and such issues online. And I think it's really important to say that we are not here to invalidate anyone else's take on it. There are an awful lot of fans, particularly Black fans who so truly believe in Louis and Claudia's journey, who've never seen themselves represented on screen in the same way that Bailey Bass and Delaney Hales and Jacob Anderson have given them that degree of representation. And to suddenly have this horrific, and it is horrific, act of domestic violence be perpetrated by you sort of, the typical pretty white romantic character. And then for that to sort of go on and be excused as part of this big gothic romance. I can understand why they're not here for any of that. I can understand why for some fans, Lestat is an inexcusable domestic abuser, and that nothing he does or says can absolve him from that. That's not my take, but we're certainly not here to invalidate anyone whose view is that that is the case. And it is a discussion that comes up on social media, which is not known for its nuance on a daily basis. Poor Sam Reid takes a lot of strays for this sequence. I know he was on social media during series 1. I hope to God he never looks on social media now, because there are unfortunately people who do carry over their antipathy for a character to the actor, and he does get some very unpleasant takes as a result of this. And I do wonder if the writers would do it the same way if they knew how badly people would react to this, because certainly fans truly dislike it. The book fans hated it because Lestat dropping Louis is really out of character. I mean, he and Louis get in some terrible fights through the books, and Lestat does terrible things. He becomes the right-hand man of the devil for a reason. But in pure Anne Rice fashion, they're just kind of brushed over, and we just kind of go back to Lestat being Lestat. But Lestat at his heart is just kind of vampire Ken in a way. He's just this sort of fluffy, adorable, diva-like character who loves life, loves everybody in it. He adores everything around him, like in the beginning when he first meets Louis and he's, offering drinks to the musicians because they're always forgotten. He loves life. He loves music. He loves everyone. And he falls in love in the books at the drop of an absolute hat. And in the Vampire Lestat, I'm listening to the audiobook at the moment, and every 10 minutes he's cried about 15 times. And so to take all of that and then have him purposefully drop Louis like this, I can understand why the book purists were like, what the fuck? Like, what are we doing here? So it is an absolute flashpoint. To me, it is done to give them a narrative reason to kill Lestat.
Yes.
And it's not like the film version where there's that sequence, which I think Cruise is fantastic in, where he's giving Claudia another doll and she's not interested in it. Says, why do you keep giving me dolls? And he starts talking about women who will have the attributes that you will never have. Throughout it, Lestat is both a loving father in that film and repeatedly incredibly cruel to Claudia. We don't actually see that here. I mean, we've seen the sequence where he calls her a mistake and he's incorrectly saying that their lives were very happy without her. And he's clearly hugely resentful of Claudia towards the end. But we have not seen anything up until he drops Louis that justifies Claudia and Louis killing him. Because he's been a shitty husband and cheats on Louis with Antoinette. That's it. He's not done anything else. He has kept them prisoner through willful ignorance, I suppose, but he's not actually, until the later sequence on the train, he hasn't physically prevented anything. So I feel like this is the scene that is used to kind of turn the tide and justify what happens later. But I don't think they needed it. I think the scene on the train is when he drags Claudia back in the later episode is absolutely horrific. And all they really needed is justification. I feel like this is sort of the cherry on the top, but perhaps not necessary. And I also think the fact that they changed the fight in the later episode to show it as being much more even. It's interesting in that it shows that Louis is not above presenting himself in a very flattering light, but it also allows for the audience to question everything that Louis says, which again isn't helpful. We're not supposed to believe that Louis is an unreliable narrator. We're just supposed to, I think, believe that sometimes he's willing to embellish a little to make things look Because if you watch the two sequences side by side, they don't contradict each other, really. It's just that you're seeing much more of the fight in this episode from Claudia's viewpoint. And obviously, in the next one, we go into the room and we see that he really does destroy Lestat as much as Lestat is attacking him. But none of that is acceptable. I find the drop unfortunate, to be honest. I don't think it was necessary. And I think it's unfortunate that it's created such a flashpoint in the fandom, and I can completely understand why people have such incredibly strong views on it.
I don't for a second think that you say that the writers necessarily thought that there would be this reaction. I think they were just trying to think of something that would be what is the most heinous thing that they could do, because as you say, they put up with Lestat's cheating and with his comments, his hurtful comments, but then equally Louis has given Lestat the same cruel comments. It doesn't that none of that is quite enough for them to separate. I mean, they're going to be together for 7 years after their daughters run away. Like, there needs to be some really big thing to happen to cause a rift that can't be gone back on. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, that is some heinous physical abuse. I'm going to get very briefly very personal. My mother was, when I was a child, she was in an abusive relationship, and my mum stayed. But the day that my quote father turned on me when I was a 3-month-old baby, she got out. It was, she was fine tolerating it for herself, but as soon as that aggression then moved to her child, she packed a bag and left, and we have never been near that man since. And so I kind of feel that it is understandable in this that it needs to get to something like that cataclysmic event that is finally the thing that severs any of Louis's ties to Lestat, and it's like, no, we have to move forward. It's a horrible scene. It's uncomfortable, and I feel as well there's that whole. It's also there to show that extra vampire power. Oh, Lestat can fly. Opens up this whole can of worms with Lestat has had this ability and he has never shared it. But Louis and him have been together now for at least a couple of decades, and he's never been like, oh yeah, by the way, babe, I can fly. So I kind of feel that is also an odd choice to mix into all this toxicity, because the vampire fans, you see, they've seen it earlier, like, oh, these vampires have reflections, and they're waiting. There's the podcast Vampire Videos that watches vampire content and rates all of the vampires on their abilities. Do they have reflections? Can they fly? Can they control animals? So some people will be watching this and be like, oh, you can fly, tick. And that's not really what you want to be getting out of this scene.
No, I mean, it's a rough scene. I mean, Claudia walks in and Louis, being Louis, just accepts her instantly and is like, my God. And our Diva King Lestat is unimpressed and unappeased. And at the beginning of this sequence, I'm kind of with Lestat. I mean, she's not been gone for 7 days. She's been gone for 7 years. She's left them for 7 years. And yes, she's been out there doing her thing. But she's left Louis, from Lestat's point of view, she's left Louis in this terrible, terrible clinical depression. She just abandoned him for 7 years. And then she walks straight back in and kind of gives an apology that, I don't know, it never seemed tremendously sincere to me. There is this one moment when she appeals to Lestat and says, if what I've heard about in terms of the folklore is wrong, then tell me. And if he had just at that moment done so, gotten over himself and been able to sit down and have a conversation with her, everything would have gone completely differently. But he just can't do that. And he's furious that she's left Louis basically suicidal for 7 years. And then, of course, the first thing she does is, well, okay. And he's like, oh, so came back for a quick pit stop before you fuck off for good. And then she's like, yeah, and I'll be taking Louis with me, thanks. And that's the point where it just degenerates, because she's absolutely right. Lestat is completely and utterly terrified, I think, of losing her, but primarily of losing Louis. So he immediately goes on the offensive. He starts attacking her. He uses fear as a manipulation tactic by saying you don't know what's out there. And that the worst thing, as I said, is that everything he's saying here comes to pass. And I kind of wish it hadn't, because the fear is a manipulation tactic. He is justifiably terrified of the vampires in Paris and the Paris Coven, but he never ever warns them. He doesn't warn them. He lets them go out there completely blind. And he just uses fear as a manipulation tactic in the hope that if they're scared enough, they'll stay with him and they won't go out into the world and they won't be without him. But it doesn't work. Claudia is her father's daughter. She's way too strong to be manipulated like that. And the second he realizes that Louis, after 7 years of, like, as he said, groping and moaning and whining for her, is about to leave him, the second she walks through the door, that terror just turns into complete and utter screaming rage, and everything is over the second he grabs Claudia by the throat. I mean, I imagine that if your partner grabbed your daughter by the throat, I'd be getting a phone call in the middle of the night to bury your body.
Pretty much. But I think that the interesting thing as well with Claudia coming back and stuff, and obviously Lestat can see the pain that her being gone inflicted on him. Bruce could hear Louis calling out telepathically, so it surely means Claudia could too. So it's that thing as well of like she has deliberately not even at any point she could just think back like it's all right. I'm at college.
Don't worry, Dad. I'm fine. Yeah, I'm doing my thing. No,
yeah.
I mean, and we're not. People get very upset when people talk about Claudia, but I mean, we have to accept she's a kid. She's a kid and she was angry at her parents, so she's left. And yes, she has been kind of willfully cruel during that period because she has, you're right, she has shut her mind to Louis. She's been able to hear Louis saying all these things. Or maybe she hasn't actually. No, because she's a weaker vampire. So would she be able to hear him?
I don't know. I mean, I know she is capable of shutting him off because we see in later
she's capable
episodes
of communicating with him.
Yeah, she deliberately does. But then equally, as her maker, Lestat is always able to sort of feel her. Like I think that's something that again is discussed in the second season, where the maker kind of always has that bond and connection to their children. And so at any point, Lestat could have said, Louis, she's all right. I can sense her. She's doing all right. But no, everybody is denying Louis the thing, that comfort that he, would make him feel fractionally better.
Yeah, I mean, I think all Lestat can do is feel that she's still alive. What he can't do is communicate with her, and that's part of the problem of them not having the relationship that they need to have, because she can only communicate telepathically with Louis. She can't communicate telepathically with Lestat in the same way. So he is always on the outs of that duo from the very beginning. But she can speak to Louis in her head, and she chooses for 7 years not to. I think we could be kind and say that maybe she can't hear, maybe it's not like a full strong vampire. She can't hear Louis' thoughts on the wind, but as you said, Bruce certainly could. Oh no, actually, because she says you heard that too, so she could hear it. She says you heard that. So yeah, she's ignored Louis' desperate pleas for 7 years in order to punish him, and that is consistent with the books. I mean, towards the end of it, she is fed up with them, both of them. She's done. They are two selfish morons who made her into this life that she hates, and she loathes it. And in the books, she specifically states in her diaries that she manipulated Louis into killing Lestat because she knew she would never be able to manipulate Lestat into killing Louis. And I don't know if they will have that play out. That seems like quite a harsh choice for this Claudia.
Yeah, no, I agree.
She's definitely done with both of them at the point she leaves, and she cuts them off stone dead for 7 years. So yeah, she's, you know, it's, I mean, they are entirely to blame for making her. They're entirely to blame for not raising her in the correct way. But she does leave. You can understand her not wanting to get in touch with Lestat, but she does leave Louis for 7 long, cold years without a little, hey, Dad, don't worry, I'm fine. But it's also interesting because she cuts him off for 7 years, but then the second she walks through the door, she wants her daddy. Yeah. She wants to take him from Lestat. That's the first thing she wants, because I think when she sees him sobbing after Grace leaves him, she realizes that she really does want family, but that for her, family is Louis, not Lestat, or not in the same way anyway. And yeah, then we get the fight, which is absolutely horrific to watch. Claudia is a terrified little girl throughout. We later see that the beating is sort of equal, but it isn't and never can be, because Lestat is significantly more powerful than Louis. And as you said, he can fly. Louis can come for him and he can literally just fly above him like, ha ha, you can't get me. Lestat never had to lay a finger on Louis, and Louis didn't. He could have prevented Louis from laying a finger on him. So it's as much as the physicality of it later is shown to be a bit more equal, it's not, because Louis was always at a significant disadvantage. The scene of Lestat dragging Louis is almost unbearable to watch. It's really upsetting. And as is Claudia by that point, just desperately begging this abuser for some comfort, trying to distract him by calling him Uncle Les, which obviously she hasn't called him in years. And yeah, I've always been intrigued at the line, "It was never you," which is what Lestat says to Claudia, because I always took that to mean not, I hate you and we don't care about you, but to mean my relationship with Louis was not about you. This isn't about you. And I was wondering what you took that line to mean.
I think I'm on a similar wavelength to you, because I mean, I guess the kind of basic interpretation would be, you don't matter to us, we don't want you, this isn't about you, go away. But you're right, it's more, no, this is between me and my husband, this is our shit, this is not on you.
It's not delivered in the cruel way that he said when he calls her a mistake.
Yeah, I feel like this is something that would have potentially happened had Claudia been made or not. You know, had Louis not left Lestat that night and had they continued to stay together, I mean, it was already bad, as we said, it was bad before they made Claudia. I feel that we would have got to a similar scenario a lot sooner. Something else would have been the catalyst for it, but this, I don't feel that their issues are anything to do with Claudia.
No, I agree. I mean, he definitely becomes deeply resentful of her, and much, much more resentful after this episode. But in that moment, I always felt it was Lestat saying, this isn't about you. This is about Louis not loving me. This is about us. This isn't on you. Nothing we do is on you. Maybe that's a generous reading, but that's certainly how I took that particular line reading. And the music in this sequence is absolutely astonishing. Daniel Hart's music is incredible. And we see Lestat flying. And I think it was a very purposeful decision as well in this sequence, because to be frank, Sam Reid looks incredible in this scene. He's in this beautifully tailored black outfit. The waves are looking on point. And I think that's done purposefully to kind of be the juxtaposition to Claudia's saving black angel. Lestat is this damning white angel. And he drags poor Louis up into the sky and gets him to try and say that he doesn't love him. Which, interestingly, Louis won't do that either. Louis won't say, I will never love you, but he also won't give Lestat what he wants. He's a very confusing man, but he's not prepared to say, I will never love you. Not that it would have changed the outcome in any way, shape, or form. Lestat is gone at this point. He's just pure rage and viciousness. He just wants to hurt him. But he won't say that. But he can't say he loves him either. And then when Lestat says anything for you and drops him, it's absolutely horrific. And very rough sequence to end the episode on. It is beautifully directed. It is beautifully scored. I think Bailey Bass, Jacob Anderson, and Sam Reid are all absolutely incredible in it. And I actually do think Asad Zaman does some very fine work with very little in the background here. His line readings are very, 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 very sharp here. And he's got incredible comic timing. But it is not a fun episode. It's not one I enjoy rewatching. I feel sad that it is such an incendiary episode as far as the fans are concerned, because for an awful lot of people, Lestat never comes back for this. And that has become more of an issue as we move towards, obviously, telling Lestat's story, because people don't necessarily want to watch Lestat's story. We are left with the plot hole of Bruce. I presume we're going to see at some point that either, well, it would have to be Lestat, I would think, but I presume we're going to see that at some point that Lestat took care of Bruce. But again, they're going to have to be careful not to do that in too much of an avenging angel way, because that little sequence when he realizes what's happened to Claudia and offers no sympathy whatsoever, which we didn't talk about. And it's such a sad thing because he recognizes instantly what has happened. And yet, given that it's happened to him too, he just doesn't give the degree of sympathy he needs. I think it's like this thing of, well, I survived it, so you can too.
Yeah, it's that whole boomer thing of, well, I did it, it didn't do me any harm, and it's not helpful, and that's why we need to progress as a society to be a little bit more aware of other people's situations and how we can help with our own experiences. But it's a brutal episode, and just also poor Levin Akin. This is the first episode that they directed, and it's this episode.
I know, he's so good. Levin Akin is superb director. What an episode to come on. It's like, yikes.
Yeah, it's like, we've had Keith Powell getting to show like Queen Claudia in all of her finery, and teen sexy best, and Louis and Lestat growing apart with their 7-year itch, and we've had the sweeping sort of like first two episodes, and then they come in and it's like, oh yeah, so enjoy, guys. This is going to be a really emotionally devastating episode for all of the cast and crew and the audience at home. But yeah, you got this, guy. Your first time, but you got this.
I mean, Sam Reid has been quoted as saying that when he saw Jacob Anderson in the makeup, he was like apologizing to him. He was, they all said it was fairly miserable to film, particularly the sequence where he's dragging him. It's just not what you want to do. It's no fun at all. And yeah, a rough episode. But we will bring, slightly more light. I mean, next episode is all about them growing, Louis healing, getting stronger, and hate sex in Antoinette's bed.
Thank you for sticking with us through this episode. We know it has been a tough one, and comparison to some of the other episodes that we've covered. So yeah, we thank you so much for sticking with us. And yes, next time we will be delving into episode 6, like angels put in hell by God. And yes, we will put details of where you can follow us and get in touch with us in the show notes. And thank you as ever for joining us.
Thank you.